Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Exploring Intersections. My name is Meenakshi Iyer, your host and founder and principal of Northstar Solutions and Services, which is a virtual boutique, future of work-oriented coaching, training, and consulting practice. And today's guest is the wonderful Kim Meninger, who is herself an executive coach and founder of Your Career Success. Kim, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, that too on a Saturday.
Oh,
Lovely
my
to have
pleasure.
you. So this is episode 8 of Exploring Intersections, which is a LinkedIn Live space that is dedicated to unpacking intersections as we co-create a future of work that works for everyone. And today we are live simultaneously on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So wherever you are joining us from, welcome, and welcome to those who will catch the replay later. So thank you all for taking the time to be here. If this is your first time on the show, I just wanted to share a bit of background on how this came about. I personally think that intersections are a very phenomenal vantage point to be in. It's a space where you have the opportunity to look at different perspectives, and some of you may have heard me talk about this. I think about it like a traffic cop, especially in India. Growing up, I would always see traffic cops at the center of the intersection and directing traffic. And to me, that's a very, as an adult now, having navigated different cultures and different environments, I find intersections to be very agile spaces and a phenomenal opportunity to develop empathy all around and create inclusiveness and belonging. So when I had the opportunity to do this, I said, why not look at all the different intersections that, especially in the context of the world of work and the future of work. So here we are. And today, the intersection and focus is power and gender. And who else than Kim to talk about this with us and share her insights? So Kim is a women's leadership and executive leadership coach. Kim is passionate about empowering women to become more confident, visible, and influential as leaders. And having spent more than 10 years in the high-tech industry, Kim experienced firsthand the unique challenges and opportunities facing women in a traditionally male-dominated environment. So Kim strives to be that resource to women that she did not have during her own corporate career. And Kim has a very, I would say, an intersectional background, multidisciplinary background as well. So she has her bachelor's in psychology and has her MBA. She's an ICF certified coach and a board certified coach with certifications in career, executive, and leadership development coaching. So great to have you here, Kim, and welcome. And I would love for you to share a little bit more about yourself and how you got into this space of leadership and specifically women's leadership coaching.
Oh, thank you so much, Meenakshi. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you. And I absolutely love this concept of exploring intersections. When you and I first talked about it, I just was so excited to bring this conversation together. So as you mentioned, I used to work in high tech. I kind of stumbled into high tech and I spent over 10 years there. And it was a really, really interesting opportunity for me. And I kind of jokingly describe it as the best of times and the worst of times. I really enjoyed being in a very fast-paced, very results-oriented environment. I made some amazing friends. I got to learn about business in ways that I never thought I would. But I also, like you said, I experienced some things that were very difficult for me to process. And I had always been under the naive assumption that, oh, well, what's everybody talking about, right? The playing field is even. And I never felt different as a woman. And then as soon as you do, you can't unsee that. And it does change the way you experience the workplace and the world around you. And so, I felt like I wasn't prepared for that because I wasn't expecting it. And so it was that much more painful when I did experience it. And it's really important to me to provide women with more insights into what the realities are of the workplace, not to create paranoia, not to be pessimistic, Men struggle in workplaces as well, but I think there are certainly unique aspects of the workplace that the more we're prepared for the potential challenges, the more we can equip ourselves with the tools and resources needed to better navigate them and not make it our problem, not turn it inward.
Mm-hmm. That's a very meaningful call out, not to make it our problem and make it inward. And there's so much that that is caused because of the systems we are all a part of. So yeah, that's a great call out. So Kim, I wanted to kick off today's conversation by asking you, what does this intersection of power and gender mean to you, both as a leader and as a woman yourself?
Thank you. And I've thought a lot about this because I wanted to try to give you a simple answer, but I really think about it as, how do we create the conditions that allow us internally and externally to assume more personal power as well as more systemic power? So throughout the pandemic, lots of studies showed that countries that were led by women, organizations that were led by women, did much better during the pandemic. And that's not because women are better than men or men are better. This isn't about an us versus them conversation. It's just that it brought to the surface the real benefit of some traditionally feminine leadership styles and some of the traits that we naturally bring to the table. And I think we have an opportunity to bring those traits more fully, to step more fully into our power, but there are internal and external barriers that make it difficult for us to do that.
So would you mind sharing a little bit more on what those barriers might be,
Sure.
in your opinion?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that like I shared with my experience, I think if you think that it's a meritocracy, if you think that it's a level playing field, then if you are not getting access to the same opportunities, if you're being given feedback that other people aren't given, if expectations are different from you than they are for other people, then you automatically assume I'm the one that's doing it wrong. There's something wrong with me and I need to fix myself in some way. And I think there's so much, I talk about imposter syndrome all the time, right? I think there's an epidemic of imposter syndrome, and it tends to strike people who feel different from the majority culture. And so as women, because of social conditioning, just gender expectations, we often feel like it is inappropriate to step into our power. How many girls were told they're too bossy? Right? Boys aren't usually told that they're bossy, right? Girls, are told to be humble. We're told to tone it down. I can't even count how many women have told me, I've been told I'm too direct, I'm too assertive, things that men don't get told. And when we hear those messages, we internalize those messages. And then if nothing else, it makes us hesitant. It makes us think before we behave, before we speak. And that makes it more difficult to just organically engage, to come from a place of strength, to bring our full power into the room. And so we have these tendencies sometimes, and I don't want to speak for all women, but to engage in some hiding behaviors or to second guess ourselves, to think, well, maybe I'm not the right person to take on this leadership role. Maybe I don't want a leadership role because of what I see when I look to that next level. But what we don't necessarily think more fully about is that with more power, if we can step more fully into those roles, then we have the influence to create change. So it's just, I think sometimes I hear women who say, well, I don't know if I'd be a good people manager. I'm like, anyone who says that is going to be a great people manager, right? We have too many people managers who just assume that they're amazing and don't have self-awareness, don't have humility, don't ask for help. We need more people who recognize that it's hard work. Managing people, taking on leadership roles within organizations is hard work, and it deserves a certain level of respect and attention.
Absolutely. And something that you said just now, I'm tying it back to what you had shared earlier about personal power and systemic power. And when you said if more women intentionally chose to step into roles that came with positional power, then that's the bridge from using your personal power to make change at the systemic level.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And that's something that I think comes more naturally to women, or at least is more socially acceptable. It's more, it's more socially acceptable for women to advocate for others. It's more, there isn't as much backlash when we fight for other people as there is when we fight for ourselves. And so getting access to some of these positions that can then lead to change for others, right? That to be a voice that isn't represented in conversations at certain levels of an organization will automatically change the dynamic. It's automatically going to change the conversation.
Absolutely. I'm just looking at folks here. Hey, Tiffany. For those of us who are watching and will catch the replay later, I do have to share the story of how we are all met. It's all thanks to Tiffany, right? So Tiffany introduced Kim and I through our last year's International Women's Day conference. Kim was one of our panelists, and now then Kim invited me to join her team of coaches at Your Career Success, and we've done a lot of collaborative work since then. So this is just fantastic. It's full circle, and like most other people, none of us have met in person, really.
That's right.
We've been at it for about 2 years now.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And even Tiffany and I met she came to her husband, I think. Tiffany, you can refresh my memory. Came to presentations. And then so it's just amazing the world that we live in right now, for all the disruption and all the pain that it has caused, the ability to connect with people that we would never run into at a live networking event, right? We would never have met otherwise. So.
And hi Marie Christine. So Marie Christine, we just met her on LinkedIn 2 days ago. She's with C Prime Canada. Thank you for joining us. I wanted to pick it up from here. So, and Kim, you and I talked about this a little bit in advance of this conversation about how women perceive power and you talk about power, just power for the sake of power, and power to do something.
That's right.
Right. So would you mind elaborating a little bit more on that?
Sure. Yeah. So I think that it's not like we've been talking about. I mean, we all have our own individual values, our own individual motivations, but in general, as I mentioned, girls are socially conditioned differently than boys are. And a lot of times we reject power because we think of it as power over. And I'm not necessarily motivated to be the person in charge. I'm not necessarily motivated by the status that it brings. I don't need to be the smartest person in the room or the most important person in the room. But so that might be something that I associate with taking on higher levels of leadership. And then it's just not something that feels worth it to me. I might think, I don't want the politics. I don't want the hassle. I don't want the lifestyle that's associated with that. But if we think about it more from the perspective of power too, right? If I take on those roles and I am motivated to use my influence in this way, there will naturally be some obstacles. It's not going to be smooth sailing, but I have more opportunity to be the change I want to see, so to speak, to be able to change the conversation, to be able to affect policy. So one thing, one example that many might be familiar with from Lean In many years ago was Sheryl Sandberg, going into the CEO of Google's office and saying, why don't we have pregnancy parking, right? Because there'd never been a woman at that level who had the influence to have that conversation. And so they just looked at her and said, sure, whatever, right? There wasn't a fight. It just wasn't part of their experience. And so just having that seat at the table, so to speak, right? Like having access to the conversation where these kinds of decisions get made, especially at a time when there's so many open questions about what the future of work is going to look like. So many people are leaving their companies. So many people are resisting this idea of going back into the office. We need people who recognize the challenges that, women in particular face, and anybody who's not, a traditional white man. So I think we need to diversify leadership. And what worries me is if we reject it because we don't like what we think it looks like, then we will deny ourselves an opportunity to get in and change from the inside.
Absolutely. And so well said. And that's exactly what I was thinking, that when you talked about the distinction between power over versus power to, that ties back to one of the things that you said earlier, personal power leading up to systemic power. Right. And to change a system, you've got to be a part of it. A lot of times you have to change it from within. And that's a lot of hard work.
Yes.
And not always pleasant. And it can be very challenging, particularly for women, to do that.
Absolutely.
So I do want to go back to the first question a little bit more. So in your own experience, as a leadership coach, as a leader, and as a woman, how do you see yourself using power?
I see myself using power through my voice. So I speak all the time. That's my avenue. Some people write. There's a lot of ways that you can use your voice, but I use it through speaking, and I try to share these themes in ways that resonate with people. So I try to tie it back to my stories, to the stories of the clients that I've worked with. Try to really simplify as much as possible this conversation so that people feel empowered. People feel like there are specific action steps that I can take if I want to change my circumstances, if I want to step more fully into my power. And I'm very grateful for that. I have the best job in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
I really can't say enough about how grateful I am for the opportunity to have this conversation in so many different ways, in so many different platforms. And so I think it makes a difference because, every time someone says to me, I feel like you spoke to me, that to me is a use of my power, right? Like I feel so blessed to have an opportunity to influence how other people see themselves and their relationships to their workplaces.
Absolutely. And we have some real-time validation of that right here. Tiffany and Marie Christine, thank you. And it to me, it goes back to that, using your voice. I'll say for myself, I had underestimated the power of storytelling and public speaking until about a few years ago. And you're absolutely right. And I think, to me, the work that you do by using your voice to highlight issues and strategies to solve them, the inspiration that you provide, and I've had the privilege of listening to you live a couple of times, and I absolutely enjoyed it. I want to use this opportunity, Kim, for you to share a little bit more about your podcast and also about this exciting speaking opportunity that you just shared with me a few minutes ago.
Thank you so much. Well, the podcast is the Imposter Syndrome Files, and it's really special to me because I really wanted to bring the imposter syndrome conversation to a bigger audience because I was having it so often individually, and so many people were saying to me, am I crazy? Am I the only one who feels this way? And I couldn't imagine how many other people didn't have someone to ask that question of, didn't have a safe space to explore that and to get that reassurance that absolutely you're not crazy, that there are millions and millions of people, about 70 to 80% of the population who experiences imposter syndrome. So you are far from alone. And I think sometimes we feel this pressure to always put our best face on, right? We see this in social media all the time. I always joke, we don't see people's dirty dishes when we see their social media reels, right? We see the highlight reels. And so the same thing happens in the workplace. We look around, we see people, we think, oh my gosh, everyone else has it all figured out. everybody else is so much smarter, so much better than I am. There must be something wrong with me. So I wanted to bring the stories of real life people, particularly women who have struggled with this and have succeeded in spite of it, have learned to better manage it, learn to navigate it so that everybody has access to resources. And I was just recently notified that I have been accepted to speak at TEDx Babson College at the end of March. So I'm really excited about that. And it's going to be a similar theme. I'm going to be talking about how to speak when you doubt yourself. And we know that imposter syndrome tends to strike when you feel different from the people around you. And so there's so many conversations happening right now where there isn't enough diversity in the room. And so I, as a woman in particular, may be thinking to myself, well, I'm not going to share this idea because if it were a good idea, someone else would have shared it already. Or if I ask this question, I'm going to out myself as someone who doesn't know enough about this topic. And we need those voices now more than ever. We need people who represent different viewpoints and who change the conversation, not the same old conversation that we've been having, which clearly isn't working for anyone.
Absolutely. And congratulations on your TEDx talk opportunity. You. Can't wait for it. And everybody check out Kim's podcast, The Imposter Syndrome Files. We'll plug in a link in a bit. Lots of comments for you coming up here.
Thank you, Marie Christine. Thank you, Tiffany. I appreciate that.
And I can see Tiffany doing the happy dance over there.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful.
This is wonderful. So you talked you've actually kind of segued into the next question that I had for you was, what makes this intersection of power and gender important to you personally?
I just believe that I spent so much time in chronic self-doubt. I spent so much of my my high-tech career second guessing myself and worrying, and for no reason, right? Mm-hmm. Now that I've had the opportunity to sort of peek behind the curtain through various conversations that I have with organizations, and I realize all the things I worried about were not really valid or weren't valid concerns. And so I just know that we are capable of so much more than we think we are. And we get bogged down in these limiting beliefs and in these anxieties and insecurities. And if we could get past that, if we could really own our value, if we could accept that we bring so much to the world because we're special and different, not because of our ability to conform to the conversation that we're having or the people around us, there's so much more that we could achieve.
And that's another great point that you made just now. The real power is in your ability to maintain your uniqueness and actually use that to do what you need to do, as opposed to feeling the pressure to conform.
Yes, we don't need carbon copies of other people, right? We know that the system has not worked for many for a long time. And we are at this unique intersection, right, in history. We were at a crossroads in history where we have really powerful choices before us. We can either go back to the old way of doing things and pretend that the last 2 years didn't happen. Even if people are going to be kicking and screaming along the way, eventually, if we were to make that decision, we'd all have to adapt to it. Or we can embrace the fact that there are better ways of thinking about work and that work for all of us and that work for business so much better, right? I mean, you just get so much more out of your people when you empower them, when you make them feel included, when you give them a sense of belonging and allow them to bring what makes them unique into every conversation. And so it is to our own detriment if we miss out on this opportunity.
Absolutely. And when you talked about we don't need carbon copies. That's so true. And I do want to share a quick personal story here. It's like growing up in India and then starting my career there, and then having to restart it here in the US when I moved here. There were some rules that I realized later on that those rules I had made those up, and those were around. And I think I've shared this with you earlier on, Kim. It's about how the kind of clothes I wear to work, and how I show up, and how much of my cultural identity do I share in what I wear, the clothes I wear, and the bindi, for example. I'd given up on this even when I was in India, thinking that, oh, it doesn't fit with the org culture that I'm a part of, because most of the companies that I worked for were either based outside of India, or our customers were primarily from the Western Hemisphere. So somehow I had made up these rules that, when I started reevaluating everything a few years ago, I'm like, that nobody said that to me. And it took a lot to kind of admit that I was just being foolish, and then I have the right to just show up as myself, and what you said really struck a chord there for me. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing your story too. I think, I joke a lot, but I really mean it, that I think we are, when we're in the workplace, it's like middle school all over again, right? We're just all triggered, and we all want to be cool. We all want to fit in, and we all, like, we don't want to be the person that gets ostracized. And so we feel all this pressure to think about what we're going to say and what we're going to do. And it's just, when you think about that level of anxiety, you're not problem solving when you're in that state. You're not creating. You're not being innovative in your thinking. You're coming from a place of self-preservation. And for organizations these days that are so dependent on knowledge workers and the ability to tap into our brain power, you're not getting people's brain power when they're afraid to ask a question. You're not getting the best of them when they're sitting in a room thinking, am I dressed appropriately? Am I speaking appropriately? Do I belong in this room? Right? I mean, you can have as much, diversity in the room as you can get, but if you don't make it safe for people to be themselves and share, you might as well not have anyone in the room at all.
So true. So true. I want to ask you, how do you think, in this particular context, how do you think women can use their power? Doesn't matter what level in the hierarchy. How do you think a woman as an individual in the workplace, how can they use their power to bring about change?
I think part of it starts with our own relationship to power. We need to understand, what does power mean to us, right? So again, if we think of it as just being powerful, that might not be a value that we hold. But if we think about, what do I want for myself and the people around me? What are my values? And if I could wave a magic wand and have unlimited power, what would I do with it? So we have to start from a place of purpose. How do I want to use my power and influence? And then I think it's really important to, I'm going to oversimplify this conversation, because we could spend all day talking about how do we get past our inner critic and things like that, right? But let's assume that we can do some of that inner work that allows us to show up more powerfully. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to do the kinds of things that we're talking about, especially when we're not sure what the reaction is going to be. And so I think of it as, if you don't do it for yourself, do it for the people around you. Give permission to other women, right? Give permission to anybody else to be empathetic, to be vulnerable, to make mistakes, to self-promote, right? We don't have enough role models of what good leadership, what good visibility, what good influence looks like. And so if we can show up that way, we can help other women to see good examples of that and to show up that way as well. And I think there's a strong individual component to this, right? We need to do our own inner work. We need to address some of the things that have gotten in our way. But then we also have an opportunity to come together more collectively. And I think that, there are often, like we talked about, there's backlash to women who speak their mind, right? There's backlash to women who engage in ways that are outside of traditional stereotypes. But if we all band together and decide we want to change the definition of what it means to be a woman in the workplace, then collectively we have so much more power, right? Because now we mainstream behaviors that have typically been, thought of as outside of the box of female behavior. And it becomes okay. It becomes okay to do that. So I think we also have an opportunity to talk more openly with each other, support one another in group settings, right? Some of the traditional ways that we've talked about, like amplifying other people's ideas, making sure people don't get interrupted, inviting people into the conversation. Those are things that we can use our power to do that no matter where we sit in an organization. We can always say, hey, let's let so-and-so finish her thought, or, oh, yeah, that was a great idea when Meenakshi said it, right? Things like that we can all do to support one another, and it changes the space.
Wow. Those last 5 minutes, I have to go back and play it all over again and make notes. No, that was so powerful. And, doing that inner work, and so much is possible from as an individual. And I think we forget that. And thank you so much for highlighting that. We, Nora Ephron's quote, always be the heroine of your life, not the victim, right?
Exactly.
That's what came up for me just now. And I know you had shared that a couple of days ago on LinkedIn. We wait for others and the system to change, right? And then there's so much that we as individuals can do.
Well, that's right. Can I comment on that for a second? Because I want to make sure that that's clear too, is there's a lot of conversation right now, important conversation about the fact that some of women's leadership programs, some of the conversation around building confidence are actually sort of trying to fix women and not addressing the larger issue of why are women struggling with confidence in the workplace in the first place. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. I believe completely that the system needs to change, which is what we're talking about today. But I also don't think it's empowering to simply shift the focus, from women to the system without giving women tools to manage that very real pain that we're experiencing, right? I mean, you can tell women, you can call it imposter syndrome, you can call it whatever you want, but the experience is very real. And many, many women are feeling that way. So while we wait for the powers that be, right, to fix this system, what do we do in the meantime? And so my goal is always to ensure that women know that they're not a problem that needs to be fixed, but there is a problem and we have personal tools we can use to better manage it.
Oh, I have to write this down. Women are not a problem to be fixed. There is a problem that needs fixing.
Yeah. And the more we empower ourselves to do that, and I think part of it is, one of the things I hear a lot, or I read between the lines, and it's certainly been my own personal experience, so I can see it in others too, is a lot of times in the workplace, we as women feel like we are hanging by a thread, right? Like there's no margin for error here. I have to be perfect. If I make a mistake, if I say no to a request that's asked of me, if I upset somebody, my career is over. Right? I'm going to, I'm going to be ostracized. I'm not going to have access to opportunities that I want. In some environments that are toxic, that might be true. But even in the worst case scenario, you always have the power to leave, right? And I don't want to oversimplify that either, because I know that there are women who don't have the privilege of being able to quit their job and go immediately find another one. But at this point in history, it's an employee's market. There is a really tough time finding talent. And so even if you don't leave today, set a plan for yourself. Use this time to work on yourself. Use this time to really think about what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what are some opportunities externally that would better respect you and give you the opportunity that you deserve. Like we should never feel like a hostage in our work environment. And that goes back to the quote, right, about being the heroine, not the victim.
Yes, absolutely. And this actually brings me to my next question, which is, how might one use or embrace this intersection of power and gender to create impact and value?
I think it's a really good question, and it's a complicated one. So I want to think about this one for a minute, right? Like, I think we need more, and this is something that's been on my mind a lot lately, is we need to have more conversations with men about this. Um, we do a lot of great work as women. We are, those of us who have the opportunity to be part of women's communities, whether that's within our organizations or externally, have such a gift. The solidarity among women is really, really powerful. Now, is it perfect? No. We could have a whole other conversation about the ways in which women don't support other women, right? But in general, I think we're doing a lot of great work to build community among other women, but we really, really need men. We really need to be in partnership with men in the workplace, because they still do hold most of the power. And if we're going to realize the vision that we're talking about, we have to make sure that all voices are part of that conversation. And that includes men as well. And so I think we have an opportunity to start to more strategically invite men into these conversations, to, we've all seen the statistics, right? The research is out there. I think there's no question that organizations do better when they have greater diversity. But men are feeling a lot of pain and a lot of fear right now too. And there's going to be a lot of resistance and a lot of backlash to any efforts to change the system if they aren't part of that process. So I think it's really important for us to think about how we can better collaborate with them as well.
That's a great point, and a very critical one. And there's a lot of comments here. Marie Christine says talks about her mom who showed her very early on in life. That's fantastic.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah. And Lalia talks about how it's true and how so many of us women forget the power that we really have. Tiffany's in agreement, talking about male allies. And, this is something that's been making the rounds on social media about everybody's talking about empowering women, but who is training all the men and the other allies to deal with all these empowered women?
Yeah, exactly. And, it's interesting because I've been partnering with Jake Fishbein, who is a leadership, he's obviously a male leadership coach, but he runs men's groups. And he runs men's groups to help empower men to be more vulnerable, to just sort of experience the fullness, redefining masculinity in more healthy ways. And he and I are having a conversation in March to bring men and women into conversation around these very issues. Like, where do we both have insecurities, or where do we both feel like we're not heard or supported, and just to try to create less of an us versus them conversation and more of a we conversation.
Absolutely. I remember seeing a post about that, Kim. That's a great, and if you wouldn't mind sharing that link to that event in the chat later, that'd be fantastic.
I would love to.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this conversation, Kim, what are some of your parting thoughts on this topic?
Well, I'm so grateful to have this conversation. And I think, again, it all starts with us. And that's the good news and the bad news. The good news is that we have more power than we think we do, but we also have a responsibility to really make sure that we're bringing healthy mindsets to our experience, whatever that might look like. So really thinking about where you might be struggling internally or externally, looking at yourself and where you might be holding yourself back, looking at your environment and how that might be getting it your way, and asking some tough questions. I mean, we're all really busy. We don't have a lot of time for reflection. And sometimes we we resist reflection because we don't like what we're going to see. You're afraid of what we're going to find out. But I think it's really important that we start with a self-evaluation of where are we, where do we want to be, and how can we begin to start to break down some of the things that stand in our way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And hi, Sajid Kumar. Sajid Kumar has a question. So he has a comment and a question. So he says, COVID has opened up the options for women to find their true calling and pursue their entrepreneurial options, which is absolutely true. We're seeing a lot of evidence of that. The Great Resignation has opened better options for women. Women need to find great allies. But will going back to the normal, whatever that looks like, tilt the equation? And I know you touched upon this a little bit as well, Kim.
I worry about that. I do worry about that. I worry even if we are, we really need to be intentional about this, because I worry even if we go to some sort of permanent hybrid model, if all the working moms decide to work from home and all the, sort of young men decide to work in the office, what happens to women's advancement opportunities? Does it become a, out of sight, out of mind scenario? I think that these questions really need to be considered thoughtfully. If we are going to change the paradigm of what it means to work, that there are considerations to fairness and equity going forward.
So true, so true. And, thank you for your comment there, Tiffany. Yes, absolutely. And Sajid Kumar has been one of our allies and supporters for our last year's conference as well. So lovely to see you back here, Sajid. And it's true. This was something that came up in one of my other conversations, that with this whole talk about going back to the office or back to a workplace, it's invariably because women are so disproportionately loaded with caregiving duties that they are the ones that are potentially going to find it much harder to go back to the office, because not all the scaffolding in terms of the support services are all fully back to full capacity. So schools, daycares, people coming in to support to support elder care and things like that, and it'll probably just, the risk of going back to how things were is very high, and women are potentially at the risk of ending up on the wrong end of the stick, if you will, in terms of the recognition that they get, in terms of because the proximity bias will start playing out.
That's exactly right.
Right. So that's a big risk, and that's the opportunity as well, in terms of how do we change the ways of working, and how do we better explore this intersection of power and gender too.
Exactly. And I don't know any men who want to go back to the way it was either. But I think that's also something where it's more socially acceptable for women to say that than it is for men. And yes. So, this is another opportunity for us to work together.
Yeah. So your conversation with Jake is just got even more important. Right. Well, Kim, this was such a pleasure, and everyone that's watching us live, and for your engagement, this has been absolutely wonderful. And I know we've not even scratched the tip of the iceberg in this. It's a big topic and a lot of work that needs to be done. But Kim, thank you so much for being here with us today, and thank you for your partnership and your friendship, and your work in rising by lifting others, especially other women colleagues and entrepreneurs. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Meenakshi. I feel exactly the same way about you. And you made my job so easy today. Great questions. You're so supportive, and I'm so grateful for our friendship, for our partnership. And Tiffany, you too.
Yes, absolutely. And before we leave, I wanted to remind everyone, I wanted to do a few plugs. So one is go check out Kim's Imposter Syndrome Files podcast, if you haven't already. And we're all going to wait, and we're going to stay tuned for your TEDx talk, Kim. So let us know when that comes out. And also follow Kim if you already don't on LinkedIn. And Kim, you also run a women's group, right? That meets every week.
Oh, yes, yes. So I run a group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern for women to come together and have conversations like these, basically to have conversations that aren't happening in many other spaces. So it's just a place for us to support each other, realize that we're not alone, and find ways to troubleshoot some of the challenges that we're facing.
Absolutely. And that's a Facebook group. So contact Kim for details. It's a Zoom meeting, and I've been a part of that, and I've learned so much from it. And finally, wanted to let everyone know that Tiffany and I, we are collaborating once again this year, just like last year. And we are co-hosting a conference, a global conference, and that's tied to the International Women's Day this year. And the conference is titled Future of Work, Women Shaping the Global Pandemic. And we'll kick off, it's a 2 half-day event, and it starts exactly a month from today. March 19th is our first day. And Kim has been one of our past speakers. So this is all sort of like coming together. So we would love for you to join us at the conference. There are lots of special pricing provisions that are available. So contact Tiffany or me directly. And watch out, stay tuned for our posts about the conference and the phenomenal speaker lineup that we have. We are so excited about the global diversity and representation in the speaker panel. So once again, thank you so much for joining us, everyone, today. And we will see you back here soon. Thank you. Take care.
You.
Bye.